So now we're going to talk about how to identify suitable partners and unsuitable partners as well. But I think that before we start looking at other organizations, it's really valuable to start by doing a bit of a reflection and in a self-assessment of your own business and of yourself as well, and of your staff and your capabilities. So I think that starts with asking yourself a couple of questions, right? So number one is, what does the business need? Right? What does the business need? What am I trying to achieve? Right? And that can take, that can be so many different things, right? So for example, in our examples that we were talking about in the last video, we were talking about, users, or we were talking about media attention and, effectively, eyeballs on your brand, right? It could be money, it could be capital injection, it could be resources, it could be people, it could be specific, specialized knowledge from individuals, it could be hardware, it could be lots of different things, right? But it's important that before you engage in a partnership with someone, where you ask them to give you something, that you make sure that it's something that you want to get, right? And so I think it's really important for you, to have a look and just kind of go through some of these things and write them down, basically, and become aware of them. If you have staff, then also consider your staff in them as well. So what does the business need? This is effectively, what is the benefit I'm looking for, right? Then other things as well. What is your budget? This is the cost you're looking at, right? And, the cost can also take the form of other things like capacity. So when I say capacity, I mean in the sense of, time, of resources, of people. Do you have staff that can help you? Because partnerships are work, no matter what, no matter how well you negotiate them, you do, there's going to be something that you're going to have to do in return, right? And that can take the form of aggressive marketing campaigns, writing emails, creating content, doing this, doing that. I mean, it's a lot of work. They can be very, very, very resource heavy. So ask yourself, do you have those resources? Do you have the time? Do you have the human, the human labor, the people? Do you have, for example, a design resource? Do you even have a marketing, person, someone to help you with that? Or are you doing all of that yourself? There's a lot to consider in terms of your capacity. Another thing that I think is, super, super, super important is, what are your deal breakers, right? So at what point is the cost element of your formula, of your cost benefit analysis formula, at what point does that outweigh the benefit that you're hoping to achieve? And also, at what point does it make the benefit moot? You know what I mean? So deal breakers, for example, when you're a really small business, particularly a really kind of early stage business, and you're not necessarily doing things in the cleanest way per se, like you might still be doing things kind of relatively, in relatively scrappy ways, and difficult processes that don't necessarily scale, you'll find yourself at some point in a negotiation for a partnership where, the partner might expect you to do things that, should be normal, but aren't your normal yet. So for example, think payments, right? So for example, I worked on a partnership once where, the company that I was working for was taking money on behalf of the partner that we were engaging it with. And they would be taking money on their behalf for every day for 2 weeks, consecutive weeks. So 14 consecutive days, okay? And the partner wanted to be paid on a daily basis. So they wanted us to disperse their cash every night after trading was over for 14 days straight. And at that time, our business was only, making disbursements on a weekly basis. So under our normal processes, we would have only paid our partner twice, basically. So for a week's trade at a time. And at the time, the people that I was working with, I think, effectively agreed to pay them on a daily basis. Well, this was a lot more complicated than it sounds. It really throws a spanner in the works in terms of your day-to-day operations. It can really, particularly where you're storing your data and where you're storing payments information, all that kind of stuff, it can be very difficult, right? So, I mean, you know, funnily enough, things like that can be a deal breaker. They seem kind of, you know, like non-issues, just agreeing to pay someone more frequently than you usually would. But sometimes those things are a lot more complicated. And this comes back as well to your capacity, is what are you capable of doing with what you have currently available to you? And so, especially when you're a small business, the power dynamics are almost, you know, always a bit off, right? When you're in that really kind of scale up phase and you know that you are significantly smaller than the person, than the organization that you're trying to engage in a partnership with, you know, it can put you in a bit of a funk, and it can sometimes feel a bit harder to say no to certain demands from that partner. It could make you, you know, because you're kind of, you know, willing to please them, because I guess you're aware sometimes that you're giving less than you know, what they're giving you. And so, you know, sometimes you want to overcompensate by just never saying no to anything. And that's definitely a position that I found myself in. And ultimately, it doesn't do anyone any favors. You know, if the whole, for going back to this example about the payments with the 2 weeks, if the whole 2 weeks are going to throw your company off for 3 months because you've effectively broken your system just so that you could use it for those 2 weeks with that one partner, and then you're stuck to fix it afterwards, then, you know, is that really worth it? Is it worth the partnership to say yes? Oftentimes it's not. But anyway, you need to have a long, hard think about what your deal breakers are, and then also be prepared to say no and back yourself when a deal breaker presents itself. And then last but not least, familiarize yourself with your metrics, you know, with your demographic, with your audience and the people that you're serving, and what you know about them, what their wants and their needs are and their behaviors are within you know, your product or your service. That's really valuable information to have, particularly around the behaviors of your audience and the behaviors of your user base or your clients, because it is, number one, it's insight that only you have, and then also it's you know, these are the kinds of things that you want to know when you go and you have a conversation. When you're speaking to a partner and they're sizing you up, you want to, you know, you need to know what you're talking about. You need to know how your clients, you know, behave, how your product or service, you know, influences them or is a part of their daily life, for example. And that kind of information it's very valuable to have. So you absolutely need to spend the time doing this reflection and assessing yourself and your business, where you're at, before you can even think of approaching other people about partnerships. So now that we've gone over that, we're going to talk about how do we find partners? How do we distinguish suitable partners from unsuitable partners? So now basically you've done your self-assessment. Now you're going to start doing your research. So again, we've just in our self-assessment and in our, you know, reflection here, we've asked ourselves the question of what does the business need? So what's the benefit? And what is my capacity / budget? So what's my cost? What's the cost I'm willing to pay? So we come back here and our first questions are pretty logical, right? Number one, who has what I want? Who has the benefit? So I'm looking, if I am, for example, you know, if we go back to that first example that I had here with, you know, with Hey You and Circles Life, they both have if we assume that the benefit that both parties were seeking was that of their brand being put in front of another audience or being put in front of people that did not yet know about their brand, then it made sense for each of them to reach out to people that had big audiences, basically. So ask yourself that question. Who has what I want? And second, and this one's definitely a lot harder to answer because, you know, you don't know unless you talk to them, but it's who wants what I have. So it depends on what you have, right? So for perhaps, you know, this question might be easier to answer for some than others. So for example, if you are, you know, a social media or a website, let's just say you are a blog. You've got a blog that you've been posting on for quite some time. You've got monthly traffic of 100,000 people. So 100,000 people come on your website every day. Sorry, on a monthly basis. And what you've got effectively is an audience. You've got eyeballs. So it's kind of easy to deduce, you know, who wants eyeballs. Advertising companies, brands perhaps that, you know, so you'll see, for example, I guess influencers or other kind of content creators or publications will, you know, write articles, for example, on different products that they've used, and you know, or write reviews on specific products, or, you know, offer discounts or something along those lines. That's not that hard to deduce. But when you are actively looking for, you know, a partner, like an organization that wants what you have, you do kind of have to make some assumptions there. But if we kind of continue down this list, we can see, if you continue your research, you know, you also want to look into, have our prospective organizations, the people that we've identified as having what I want, have they engaged in similar partnerships or at all, right? So have they, you know, if you kind of do a bit of stalking and you look on LinkedIn, or you signed up to their newsletter, or to their product or service, you looked on social media, or on, you know, just their mentions or anything in different articles or whatever. Is there any mention whatsoever of other partnerships, of similar partnerships? You definitely want to have a look into that, because then it might be, you know, that might help you answer this question of who wants what I have. Is, does this prospect want what I have? Because if they've, you know, already engaged in a partnership with a similar organization to yours, then, you know, it's probably worth it. It's probably worth looking into it further. Also think about what kind of audience does this organization have, right? What kind of people do they cater to? Are they anything like your demographic? Are they, you know, do they differ? Are they similar? Will their demographic be receptive to your message, be receptive to your product or service? These are things that, again, when you know your own demographic, become a lot easier for you to kind of understand and for you to gauge prospective partners. And last but not least, you want to consider, does your product or service connect in any way with theirs? So this isn't always, you know, 100% necessary, but, you know, it does certainly make it a lot easier from a marketing point of view when there is some sort of connection between the product and service that you've got to offer, and that of a prospective partner. So for example, you know, if you think about it, the whole a mobile app that's used in, you know, for food and beverage basically, and you partner that with a telecommunications company, the link that they made there was that you could use the data supplied to you by that telecommunications company to order coffee and food on their mobile app, right? So it's a link, but it's there. And then there's also the second one being about the liquor. There's no real, I guess, inherent, I would say, link between liquor and Game of Thrones, for example. If there was going to be, I imagine it would be wine, considering wine makes much more of an appearance in the series than whiskey ever does. However, there was enough in the, you know, kind of within when you connected the whole like White Walker and the label color and all of that kind of stuff, that it made sense, and it was, you know, it was a huge hit. So, you know, it doesn't necessarily need to, you know, go as well as PB&J together, for example, but there does need to be some sort of, you know, link there, I reckon, you know, to kind of to make it palatable, basically, for people to understand, and for the other partner to understand as well. That is how you identify suitable partners from unsuitable partners. Now, in our next video, we're going to go into how to reach out to those partners that you've already identified as suitable. And also, we'll go over an example on how to write cold emails. So I'll see you in the next one.